What's up, everybody?
What's up?
What
We're
up?
back.
We're back. Season 2 is underway.
Woo.
I hope y'all liked the hype train that we brought to it. We are moving right along with... What are we talking about today?
Apollo 13, baby girl.
Apollo, not 12, not 14.
Not 11.
It's not even 13 and a half.
Oh my god. What would half of a space trip even
This
look
pretty
like?
much was half a space trip. Apollo 13 is like the moon landing to the moon strikes back. All right.
It's them. The astronauts are there.
All right. So this came out in 1995. It's directed by Ron Howard, who also directed How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the good one, with Jim Carrey.
The only one. What are you
Cinderella
talking about?
Man. The only one. The only one that's not animated.
There is no other Grinch movie. I refuse.
He also directed Cinderella Man and A Beautiful Mind.
God, I love Cinderella Man. I could take or leave Beautiful Mind, to be honest. But Cinderella Man, boxing, Russell Crowe. Ooh.
Better than Math, Russell Crowe?
Oh, dude, I hate math, so yes. Punching people, I understand. Math?
Ugh, gross. All right, so this grossed roughly $335 million worldwide. It was the third highest grossing movie of 1995, beat only by... Do you remember?
Oh, man. Shrek, right?
No, Shrek was like 2001. Also animated, also starring Tom Hanks.
Oh, wait, Toy Story.
Toy Story and the second worst Batman ever made, Batman Forever.
Yeah.
Anyways, this has a 7.7 out of 10 on IMDb, a 96% critic rating, and a 87% audience rating.
That's pretty good. I feel like that's almost unheard of. Like, I think it's rare that critics and audiences are within, 10, 15%
they
of
both
each
like
other.
a movie.
Yeah.
You got a banger when both of them are like, all right, I can't complain about this.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so we open with footage from Apollo 1 and narration by Walter Cronkite, who you explained to me is not an astronaut.
No.
He is a news reporter.
He's like the news reporter. Like he was like the nation's news reporter for decades.
Oh, all right. He's like daytime Johnny Carson.
Yeah, kind of, actually.
Nice.
Except less, not funny, but yeah.
So this is 7 years since Kennedy's call for the space race. And there's a mention early on of a fire at the launch pad. Was this Apollo 1 or was this later?
No, so Apollo 1 is the first of the many Apollo missions, which is kind of the unofficial name that became the official name, because the first Apollo mission, Apollo 1, was supposed to land the first man on the moon. They had everything ready. They had the crew picked out. So Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, all like decorated pilots, all accomplished astronauts and NASA members, are the original crew. And they had reached the point of doing launch rehearsal tests, which they do in the actual like spaceship, because that's the only way that you're going to get it right. And there was some sort of short in the electronics, and the cabin was filled with easily flammable stuff, and the pilots suffocated to death in the fumes. The door was not designed to be open with more pressure on the inside than the outside. Because it's not supposed to be open in space. Like, you're not...
You don't want it to open in space.
Yeah, it was viewed as like an unintentional failsafe. Like, it wasn't something that they thought needed to be done, and so they just didn't design it to be able to do that.
Gotcha.
And between the heat and the fumes and the extra air pressure that comes with heat in a closed space, it's like a jar that tries to explode and can't. They couldn't get the door open, and they suffocated to death, and then their bodies were really badly burned by the time they got them out. So it's a really big tragedy. I believe that they are the only astronauts to die in the Apollo program. And I think until the Challenger disaster, they might be the only Americans to die in a space program. Don't quote me on that, but
that was the school
80s.
teacher one.
Yeah, that was yeah.
Okay, so we are July 20th, 1969. Kevin Bacon. I won't call him Kevin Porkchop. Whatever.
It wasn't a good joke, man. I don't know what to tell you.
He's using an innuendo of landing, I guess the space shuttle.
Innuendo. He is explaining landing the space shuttle in soft porn terms.
Yeah, he's using like a banana and a cup.
There's not an innuendo there.
He's like, these things, when they meet, something magical happens.
He might as well have taken a donut and a hot dog and been like, this is how the spaceship latches.
He basically did. The party is watching this little thing called the moon landing.
Mm-hmm. Just a little sidestep in American history.
Whatever.
Still a throwaway.
So I asked you how many people watched, and you were like, everyone. Yeah. So how they broadcast live from the moon still baffles me.
It's the same thing like radio contact in space.
Yes.
Like, I'm aware that it's possible. I know how like radio waves work and that they're technically like infinite, but still, like, it's
kind of crazy.
And that they did it in a time before they had basic computers like that. I think that's what baffles me. It's not that they did it. It's that they did it when everything is still analog.
Yeah, and there's a line here coming up in just a few minutes in the movie where Tom Hanks is talking about one day we'll have a computer that fits in one room. And it's like, and you guys went to the moon?
Yeah, but I mean, that's like the Nazis having like guided rockets in 1944. Like, they had gyroscopes in the V2s, and you couldn't, it wasn't like today. It wasn't like a smart bomb, but you could set like within a certain mile radius that you wanted that rocket to land, and I think like 7 or 8 times out of 10 they could hit it. It's crazy. When people are still dying from like, diphtheria, like polio. So.
All right. They haven't figured out washing your hands is important, but we've got somebody on the moon.
Like, we only recently discovered that penicillin can cure infections, but we can also like launch a rocket from Berlin to London relatively easily.
Kill people, we got that down. Save people, we're working on it.
If you look close at like the history of technology, almost always is killing technology above all the other ones.
Maybe there's something wrong with us as a species.
Like, I would not be surprised if the army has lasers that can, like, destroy things, and I can't even get my remote to work on my TV if it's pointed the wrong direction.
All right. So, Tom Hanks, I say Tom Hanks, so he plays Jim Howell.
Yeah.
So he's going to be kind of our main character. He's our captain. So he says to his wife, Christopher Columbus, Charles Lindbergh, Neil Armstrong. So instantly we realize, like, this is a big effing deal. Like, this is not a small, literally, small step for man.
Oh my God. It is a giant leap for mankind,
it came to me. It wasn't intentional until I realized I could say it. All right. There's this amazing, like, drone shot, probably used a crane, but looking down at the shuttle. You corrected me before. It's not a shuttle.
It's a rocket.
It's a rocket.
Yes.
The shuttle is a part of the rocket.
Yeah, well, there is no shuttle right now. Like, shuttles aren't a thing. You have the command, you have the command module, and then you have the lunar module, and you have the booster rocket that propels it to the moon and then gets ejected right before they re-enter Earth. And then like 90% of that tower all just like falls off while they're taking off from Earth.
Well, I knew that part. So that part's all the rocket. And then the module is what they're in. All right, so explain it to me like I'm a 5th grader. So you have the rocket, and then you have the module. But what's the whole thing called? What's the whole thing altogether called?
The whole thing is the Saturn V rocket. That's
Saturn V
the Saturn V rocket.
So the whole thing's a rocket.
Yes.
But the bottom of it's also a rocket.
The bottom of it is a booster rocket.
But it was a booster rocket.
Yeah.
He already got his vaccine. Now it just needs the booster.
It's like asking, like, what is the thing on the bottom of a plane's called? And you're like, a missile. And you're like, okay, but what's the warhead attached to? And you're like, the rocket. And you're like, so it's a rocket? No, it's a missile.
So you're saying it's a Saturn V missile?
Stuff can be more than one thing. It's the best way.
It's confusing, man.
I don't understand how you managed to grasp the intricacies of the Powhatan Confederacy in like one go through, but the concept of multiple booster rockets stacked on one another just eludes you.
I'm confused, man.
Yep. That is why you were not part of Apollo 13.
I'm that one guy in the corner they give a dummy computer to. My buttons don't do anything.
They looked at you and they're like, Dustin, we finally made a computer that fits in one room. We need you to sit alone in that room with your new computer.
All right. So real quick, I made a mistake already. It's not Jim Howell. It's Jim Lovell.
Show of hands. Who's surprised that Dustin made a mistake with a name? They're all nobody. See, no one, no one out there.
Thanks, Kyle. This is not a video podcast. Not yet, at least.
I can feel it. I can feel the glares. They're like this guy.
So, essentially, these guys they don't have like an opportunity lined up to go into space. And then there's a issue with the crew that's going to go. One of them falls ill. He has an ear infection.
Ear infection.
Gross.
Yep.
That sounds horrible. Ear infection in space.
It was worse in real life, believe it or not. They simplified it for the movie. The guy actually had like a chronic ear condition that he had to have surgery to correct. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Where'd you hear that?
Oh my god. Dude,
all right.
where is a lunar module with a faulty oxygen canister when you need one?
It's on top of the rocket.
Good job.
All right.
Who says special people can't learn?
That's a different Tom Hanks movie. We'll get to
yeah,
it. Okay.
Good point.
All right, so they have 6 months to prepare for the landing, and the backup crew essentially is not allowed into practice because they're like, we have to get this perfect.
Yeah.
So, at this point, it is not our 3 that we're going to end up sending to space. It is Tom Hanks's Jim Lovell, Bill Paxton's Fred Hayes, and Gary Sinise. I don't know how you say his name.
I'm not old enough to remember when he was popular. So
yeah, I know. Ken Mattingly. He plays Ken Mattingly.
Lieutenant Dan, right?
Lieutenant Dan. So those are the 3 on the team, and then 2 days before launch, we find out that Ken Mattingly is going to be replaced by Jack Swidert, which is played by Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon. Because Ken Mattingly has the measles.
Well, he's been exposed to the measles.
He's been exposed to the measles.
The backup guy has the measles, and Jim Lovell is like, okay, well, yeah. I've had the measles, Jack's had the measles, and he goes, well, that's great, but Ken hasn't. So,
yeah.
So the idea is you don't want to get measles in space.
Right. Measles in space sounds like a horrible movie, but also a worst time in real life.
But probably better than weasels in space.
I don't know. I'd probably watch weasels in space before measles in space.
Isn't that just Muppets in space?
Dang. We have a little bit of a foreshadowing going on here. Several instances of bad luck. Just random things happening that aren't supposed to happen.
Filled with the backdrop of NASA is slowly losing funding for the space program.
Right.
Like, the Apollo missions, they've already been to the moon twice, I think, at this point. So why do we keep going is kind of beginning to be the public view of this thing.
Which we'll get to in a little bit. So we have bad luck. We have the fire that was aforementioned. And then here we go, man. April 11th, 1970, the astronauts entered the top of the shuttle in Houston. Our what would you call Ed Harris's character? Gene Kranz.
So Gene Kranz's official title with NASA is he's Chief Flight Director.
Chief Flight Director.
Chief Flight Director. So he is in charge of everything.
I got you.
He's the second one that NASA has, and he did the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. So the first man in orbit, first man in space, yada yada. Well, first Americans. The Russians beat us to both of those. Yeah. And then
it didn't beat us to the moon, baby.
No, probably because they were like, why are we going to the moon?
USA. USA. All right. So he is also known as the guy in the nice vest.
Yes.
Because his wife sews a patch onto a vest for each of his missions that he
and
is
she buys buys a very interesting vest like every year for him.
So anyways, he's going to call out to all the departments giving the go flight, which, really just shows how many people and how many departments are going into this and how many safety nets and how precise and perfect every little thing about this mission has to go. So the rocket is going to take off. Now I've asked you this before, and you don't have to give me a specific number, which I'm sure it's hard to actually get to. But how fast does a rocket fly getting out of space?
I remember when I looked it up, it has to be going the equivalent of like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of miles per hour.
Nice.
It's not because of the fact that the atmosphere gets easier to get through as you go, but when it takes off, it has to have the equivalent thrust of going that fast.
So the higher up you go, the easier it is to keep going upwards.
There's less air, so there's less resistance, and then by the time you get to space, there isn't resistance.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Same reason there's no sound in space. There's nothing to create sound waves.
That makes sense. Nothing to bounce off of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is falling off that spaceship as it launches? Because it looks like ice. Is it like nitrogen?
I think. Don't hold me to this. I think they use liquid oxygen as the fuel.
Okay.
So it's probably like the coolant from the hoses to keep it, because oxygen has to be really, really cold to be liquid.
Okay.
So yeah, it's either it's there for movie effect or it's just like frivolous, like things that fall. I mean, things fall off of jet planes when they take off. Like, not parts of the plane, but things like ice, water, dirt, like things fall off of things that shake that hard and go that fast. People, when doors, apparently, according to that news story I saw.
When your pilot is on shrooms and opens the door mid-flight.
Don't fly Southwest. That is the lesson I've learned from TikTok.
Okay, so they're off in space, man, and this immediately they did a signal that engine 5 is failing.
Yeah.
Not a good sign. But
NASA just goes, no, it's not. You're okay.
You're okay. So, but that's not going to be the biggest issue that they have.
No.
So they're going to dock, and essentially they're at this, my gosh, I can't think of what it was called now.
I can't help you unless I get more details.
They're docked at the space station.
Well, there isn't a space station though, so they're not docked. They're in orbit, right?
Right.
Like they're in Earth's orbit.
Right.
What they do is they have to attach the command module,
right,
that thing that you keep calling a shuttle, to the lunar module.
Lunar module, yeah.
So they're not docked anywhere. They dock with the lunar module.
Right.
They're both kind of free floating.
Well, yeah, I know that. I know they're not stationary anywhere.
There's not like a Super 8 that they pull up into.
They essentially have two modules that they have to dock together.
Let me pull a Jack Swigert. Let me get a hot dog and a donut, and let me show you how
And then they immediately were like, let's get rid of all this urine. And they dump a bunch of pee out into space. Which I think is funny is that they're looking out the window, like watching it out as it comes out. Which, I mean, obviously I would too. Like, that's
would you
cool.
not watch your own frozen urine? Just
Why not? Okay, so they begin a broadcast. But like you said earlier, this is the third time Nobody cares.
All the networks drop it. Like
they're
like
watching
last
baseball
minute.
and game shows.
They all last minute are like, nah, nobody cares. Nobody cares about Apollo 13.
And the Beatles break up at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
Freaking Paul.
2 tragedies.
I mean, it was
all
John.
at once.
The freaking Paul.
Oh man. Okay, so then now we're gonna turn this whole situation sideways when Kevin Bacon reaches to what is it called? Stir the air tanks.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so and there's a short. And there's a tiny little explosion.
A small, massive explosion.
So they don't know to what extent. But obviously this was not part of the plan.
They know there's an issue because they're in space and the whole thing starts shaking. And they're like, hold up.
Shaking and Earth is there and it's gone. And it's there and it's gone.
Yeah.
So they're spinning.
They're like, whoa.
The limb, that's what it was that they attached to. That's what I was trying to think of. It was driving me nuts. Okay.
The lunar module, yes.
Yes, but they call it a limb. So I was going to call it a limb.
L-M.
There's an E in there, I think.
There's not. I promise you. It's the limb. It's
lunar,
the LM.
Is it not expedition module?
No.
Oh.
Just the lunar.
I just thought it was LEM.
No.
All right, well, that's not how you spell limb.
Oh my god.
But okay. So the shuttle's gonna lose power. I said the shuttle.
The command module has 15 minutes of power left in it.
Right.
They have to transfer everything from the computers.
Yes.
Loosely using the term computers.
Right.
Yeah, the coordinates, their gimbal angles, which is their approach angles back when they get to Earth. Right. All the stuff to the lunar module. This can be done. It's supposed to take 3 hours or 2 hours.
Well, they have 15 minutes.
15 minutes, and they do it, which is kind of the first glimpse into like how superhuman these people's brains are.
Yeah.
Like how much of an actual certified genius you have to be a NASA astronaut.
Yeah. So they're able to pull it off, and then surprise, surprise, now everybody's curious about what's going on with Apollo 13.
Crazy.
And so now everybody's interviewing experts and talking about what's going on, and also the control room at NASA is in a frenzy.
And they're like, you got to shut everything down. Like everything that is not absolutely necessary, shut it down, because the LEM is not designed to support that many people for that long.
So they're going to run into 2 problems almost immediately. The first is not oxygen, not a lack of oxygen, but it's CO2 buildup. And then the second one is conserving power.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technical talk at this point about how to actually solve these problems, and then you have
the conserve power one is actually relatively simple. They're like, they shut everything down. They shut down lights, they shut down navigation computers, because once you reach a certain point in space, you can, in theory, slingshot around the moon's gravity. Right. Which is what NASA decides is best. They originally think maybe they should just turn around and bring them back home. And one guy says, if anything is damaged in that command module and you fire the engines, they might just blow up. And then, that's all she wrote. Or
it might cause a short, or they have to keep it constantly under a certain amount of amps. You can't rise it too much. Or you can't have it rise too quickly.
Or we don't know that we'll get more than one. Everybody's relatively certain that they'll be able to get the engine started once. Right. But we don't know if we have multiple. They call them burns. They don't know if they have multiple burns available to them. And so if you turn them around, that's 1 burn. And then presumably realigning them with the Earth, 2 burns. And so the guy's like, let's not take for granted the fact that we think we can just do all these things. Like, just launch them around the moon. That'll give us time to figure it out, and we'll get them back. It's kind of his.
So what you're talking about here is a scene where they are discussing this, and everyone in the room is saying, okay, let's turn around and send them straight back. And one guy, who we really don't even hear from throughout the rest of the movie, is like, that won't work. And it explains why, like you just said. And it turns out that not only would it not have worked, but it would have stranded them in space.
Yeah, well, there's a minute where it's difficult for the people at Houston to fully wrap their minds around what is happening, because nothing like it had ever happened before. You've had 2 lunar missions that have gone off like seamlessly.
Right.
And so they kind of approach it from, there's an electrical problem and we just need to turn them around and go back. And the guy has to reemphasize that there was some sort of explosion. Like, the astronauts told you something exploded on their craft. Do not light a fire unless completely necessary. And everybody kind of goes, oh, crap. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Sense. Okay. So they start to realize the CO2 buildup is going to be a very pressing issue very quickly. They realize that they're going to have to solve this relatively fast. And so they give, basically in the basement of Houston, they give the supplies that the astronauts have on board to a group of people, and they say, it's like a square peg in a round hole. You've got to figure out how to make this filter fit this, input.
Yeah. Because again, the problem stems from they're living in the lunar module.
Right.
Like, it's like moving from your house to your Kia Forte. Like, it's not impossible, but it's not designed for you to live in it. And so
And you can't go to Lowe's and pick up a new filter.
And you don't pack extra filters for the lunar module because you're not going to be in the damn thing that long, and there's 2 people in it. So, in theory.
So, with the makeshift filter, which I think is funny, as they're walking it, they're like, okay, this is going to work. As the guy's carrying it, it just falls apart, and he's like, dang it. He has to put it back together. It also looks
completely fake.
Yeah.
Like, it looks like nothing that would ever work.
No, it looks like some 5-year-old
It's like a box filter wrapped in a plastic bag with like a tube shoved with a sock in it, all duct taped together.
Yeah.
And man, if I was not desperate to like clean the CO2 out of that shuttle, I might just not do it. I might be like, no, it's cool.
It's fine.
All right.
Fred Hayes at one point, he's like, I ripped the bag. And they're like, he ripped the bag.
What do you do? And he goes, there should be another.
There should be another bag.
And then you're like, oh my God.
They are this close the entire time.
I think that's when the viewer, like, you understand the situation is serious, but that line kind of like reminds you how serious it is, because you're like, oh my God, ripping the bag could kill them? Like, what? Ripping the plastic bag that's designed to be ripped could be fatal? Jesus.
So they figure out the CO2 issue, so that's no longer a problem. They're gonna have to do what you said, a burn.
Yeah.
And essentially realign themselves. Wait, is this before or after they orbit the moon and come back?
That's after. Because they're not carrying the space rocks.
So they do orbit the moon. They come back. Yeah, I'm getting out of order. Sorry.
Yeah, so they orbit the moon. When you're on the flip side of the moon, like, obviously radio waves can't bounce. They go in a straight line, right?
Right.
So they can't bounce around the moon because there's no satellites out there. And so there's a period of like communication blackout. And they go, when you come back around, we'll have your reentry angles ready. Like, we'll have everything good to go. We'll have a reentry procedure and everything. While this is happening, they're contacting Ken Mattingly, the astronaut who didn't get to go, because they need somebody to help them figure out how they're going to do the reentry process with 20 amps of available power.
Right.
Which is unheard of, by the way. Like, this isn't we have an emergency manual for this and you just need to run it and make sure it's right. This is you have to create a triage startup completely from scratch based off of what you know is critical. And you have X amount of days to do it, or these guys die.
Do you remember I don't remember the number, but it was like, what was it, like 40 or 80 steps process for him to get everything turned on?
Yeah, it's a lot. I know it's enough that he he kind of reacts to it like, oh yeah, sure. Like, of course I can, it'd be like somebody asking you to sum up like the Lord of the Rings trilogy in like 3 sentences. Like, how do you, how do you even 3 words?
So
like, you got 3 words, go.
He's having to do the impossible. He's working day or night to get this, just the sequence down to where he has them
simulate cold and dark in the simulator. He refuses to use anything they don't have in the command module, right down to the type of flashlight that they use, because he's very, very aware that if he messes up one step or takes one thing for granted, he could kill his friends.
Right. Yep. And the whole world is watching.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly everybody wants to know what's happening to Apollo 18.
So, Oh, also right around this point is I put in here the most accurate part of this movie is the old lady mad that the TV's not working.
Yep.
And then thinks that it's like the nursing home orderly.
His fault.
like, why'd you mess up the TV? It's
especially because like this is at a time period where the TV has like 5 channels.
Yeah.
Right. So how in God's name could this poor guy mess it up? Like,
yeah, very accurate.
oh God.
Anyways, so they come back around and their angle of approach is off. That's what a gimbal is.
Yeah.
That's their angle.
They also, shortly before this, so Fred Hayes is like sick the whole flight off and on.
Right.
And he starts declining really rapidly as they're orbiting the moon. And I mean, they all look like death warmed over. But he has like 103-degree fever. He has chills. He can't sleep even in the scheme of like none of them can really sleep. And he, because he doesn't feel very well, starts like blaming Jack Swigert for stuff that is so clearly not his fault. Even as an audience member, you see like the ludicrousy of his accusations because he's like, what did you do when you turned the oxygen tanks on? And he's like, I stirred the tanks. And finally, Lovell has to break it up, and he goes, listen, it wasn't his fault. If I get told to stir the tanks, I stir the tanks. If you get told to stir the tanks, you stir the tanks. It happened. Like, get over it, in a sense. Like, we're not going to die up here because you're so petty. You're going to, like, place blame on this man who is 1/3 of our survival crew. Like, we're not doing that.
And then you find out that Kevin Bacon also was very close to just launching them out into space.
Yeah. And honestly, if I'm Jack Swigert and Fred Hayes is talking to me like that, like
yeah, because he has a button, I guess the button that separates the two parts of the module that would separate him from Fred and Jim. He has a note that says no
on the button.
Yeah, and Jim's like, what is this for? And he's like, I thought about launching you into space.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in real life, none of the astronauts have ever spoken poorly of each other's reactions, but in the movie, Jim Lovell is the reason these guys get back. Like, so is Houston is as well, and so is Ken Mattingly. But the reason that the 3 in space, the 3 whose lives are in jeopardy, like, can keep it together long enough to do what they need to do to get back is because Jim Lovell has like a benevolent iron fist over his crew is the best way I can state it. Like, he's not ruling them by intimidation, but he's the most respected and most experienced member of the crew. And he has like a natural shut up and do as I tell you because this is going to save our lives, like, aura about him. And that keeps Swigert and Fred Hayes' like rapidly deteriorating emotional and mental states composed enough to do what they need to do to get back.
Not saying that this isn't how it happened. We should also note that this is the movie is based off of Jim Lovell's book about the events that took place. Yeah. So this is also coming from his perspective.
Yeah, and to be fair, everybody's a hero in their own story. Like, they just are. But also, objectively, Jim Lovell has the least amount of reason to go to pieces in the sense that he's not ill and he didn't hit the button to stir the tanks that created some massive explosion. Right. And so, like, Swigert knows better, but part of anybody would be like, well, did I, did I hit the button wrong? Like,
okay, so they are coming back from the dark side of the moon. They're on their way back, and their gimbal is off, or gimbal angle is off. They're like, we're underweight. He says, how can they be underweight? Well, and this is from the people in Houston. And they go, they didn't land on the moon. And one guy goes, rocks. So he calls and he goes, hey, Jim, your gimbal angle's a little off. You're underweight. And he goes, underweight? How? And he goes, well, we were expecting you to be carrying like 200 to 300 pounds of moon rocks. Rocks. Literally just rocks from the moon.
Rocks. Yeah. He goes, oh, yeah, okay.
That's hilarious. So then they have to do that burn, and then there's another funny moment where Jim Lovell's like, I lost Earth. I can't see Earth.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny despite itself. And the reason the burn is so stressful is because you cannot turn the computers on until the very end.
It's all analog.
You have like so much power. Yeah. Well, and you have so much power stored in the batteries. Which is something that we kind of glossed over. When the explosion happened, they immediately started losing, like, everything. Yeah. Like, all the power, all the oxygen. Yeah. So it's not like they put the kibosh on a perfectly functional ship that just happened to have like an oxygen problem. Like everything's gone in the command module. And so NASA says, you don't have enough electricity to turn the computers on to do the burn. Yeah. You'll just have to do it by eye. And Jim Lovell looks around, and they do have like metric maps, so to speak.
They have like, a scope.
Yeah, they have like a periscope almost on one window of their module. And he's like, if I can keep Earth in it, that's close enough, right? Yep. And they go, yeah. And he goes, great. So I just have to keep Earth in this window, and we're good to go.
Which they're like nearing Earth's orbit at this point. Like they're not way out there, and Earth's like a little rock you have to squint to see. Mm-hmm. They're right on top of it.
Yeah,
like,
they're like within a day and a half or two of like getting back to Earth. And as the news people are reporting to the people of Earth, if you held like a cup and a pencil, or like a tennis ball and a pencil so far apart, and you put a piece of paper in between the two of them, that is the margin of error proportionately that these guys are working with.
So they got to hit it pretty close. They do. They managed to make it.
After they have to burn it for 30 seconds, I think, is what they, to like have get enough distance at a right enough angle to like fix it.
Fred Hayes is controlling in one direction, Jim Lovell's controlling in another, and Jack Swigert is counting.
So you've got like a very noticeably ill guy on one control. You have a guy who's having like a complete and utter like, what is the point of life? They're lying to us. They have no idea how to get us back. Mental breakdown. Timing it. And then you have this captain who is just very slowly like getting more and more willing to beat somebody over there with a brick in his space module. On the third, and they work like a well-oiled team. Like they just, all their conflicts go out the window to do this burn.
Right.
Because they're aware that if they do it wrong, they're going to bounce off of Earth's atmosphere and die. Like,
or be coming in too fast and
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Lunar module jettison detaches from Aquarius. Mm-hmm. The boys are heading home. They know that there's going to be a 3-minute blackout.
Yep.
Whenever they're re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, they're not sure if the heat shield is cracked in any way, then it won't work. And
at first that's not a concern that they know of. So their main concerns before they eject from all the rockets is that, do we have enough power? Does Mattingly have the instructions ready? You know, this, that, and the other. Is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? And their gimbal is still their approach angle is still a little too shallow. But it's too late to fix it, because if you do a controlled burn, you're just going to yeet yourself into the Earth's gravitational pull and die. So they hope that it's not too shallow.
Right.
And then the final, so like the command module sits on the very, very top of like the living module. It has a real name, but the spot that they're supposed to live in. And when you eject from that booster rocket, that's like the last thing to go. And as it spins around, service module, that's what it's called. As it spins around, they see an entire panel blown out of it, but it's blown out right up to the barrier of where the command module sits. And so suddenly it's like, oh God, our heat shield might be busted. And if it's busted at all, we're all going to die. So.
So they're expected to go away for 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. They say if we don't hear anything in 4, then we know. How long was that communication blackout?
The communication blackout was, I believe it was 4 minutes, but it wasn't. People knew they were back before then. Basically what happened is that the public isn't notified. Like, they don't hear it at first. Because there's something wrong or something gets messed up. The module does not broadcast directly to Houston. It broadcasts to the Navy ship that is in the area. The Navy ship gives it to Houston, and then Houston, after processing that their guys are alive, gives it to the people.
So there's a delay.
In real life, they were within the 3 minutes of contacting somebody, but Houston didn't hear about it until outside of the 3 minutes.
Okay.
It was kind of... If I remember it right, that's more or less what happened, is that they were back and people knew they were safe, but not all the people knew they were safe.
So they land in the ocean, they're home free, or they're home safe. The country's rejoicing, and you find out that it's all from a damaged coil that was built into one of the oxygen tanks that had been there for 2+ years.
Yeah, since it was built, like
and
since
just
the
had never
oxygen
been
tank was
noticed.
built. Yep.
All right.
Which is so terrifying.
I know. To think, it was there all along.
Well, that's a lot of like mechanical failures in planes are the same way. Like it's always been that way, and it just finally fully stopped. Like it finally sparked the wrong way or whatever. So.
Okay, Kyle, it's time for our 60-second review.
Oh boy.
You ready?
Man.
I think I start this time.
I think you do.
All right, here we go. Okay. So I knew nothing about Apollo 13. I honestly didn't even know that they didn't make it to the moon and back until it actually happened in the movie. So this was pretty suspenseful for me. I knew that they survived, but still, how and everything, it was very neat. I will say that I thought it was a little vanilla at times. It could have taken it into more, a little more fun with it, but overall pretty good. I'm gonna give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Okay, here we go. Eye of the tiger, heart of the cards.
23 seconds.
Nice.
Hurry up.
Okay.
Go, child, go.
Hey, no, I start mine. You leave me alone.
No,
I haven't started
it's supposed to be both of us in the same minute. You have 10 seconds.
I thought we
now.
each got a minute.
No,
I didn't understand.
You only have 7.
Movie good. Good movie. History good.
Okay, I'll have to put
Wow.
Oh man, I'll have to put that down as a defeat.
Well, I'm gonna take my 30 seconds now. Thank you.
Because
I thought we each got a minute.
Just take a whole minute now, Kyle. You done messed up the whole system.
It was me. I did it. Yep. I stirred the oxygen tanks, man. Don't blame me.
You stirred the oxygen tanks incorrectly, didn't you, Kevin Porkchop?
Yep, I hit the button wrong. That's what it was.
All right.
Okay.
You got it.
So, I thought that the movie is super good. It is pretty much as close to historical accuracy wise as a movie can be without just being a documentary. Honestly, the only glaring error is that Gene Kranz was an important part of Apollo 13, but the leader of the night shift was more involved, because kind of through coincidence, most of the important stuff when it happened in space was happening at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on Earth. So he's, in real life, he's kind of Gene Kranz's character, but Gene Kranz was well known, so he got the credit for it in the movie.
Yeah.
Other than that, though, I'll give it a 7.5. I'm with you. It's very 90s, but it's very good at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So next we have to do Armageddon.
Dude, I love Armageddon. I would not have there's nothing for me to do with Armageddon, but God, and it's so not good, but I love it so much anyway.
It's horrible, but it's so good at the same time.
It's like the Transformers, the first 3 Transformers movies, where you're I can acknowledge that this isn't good, but also, damn, I love this movie.
Just let me watch it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one interesting fact that may take a moment, and then I want one interesting fact from you. Okay, so when this was shot in 1995, or 1994 maybe, whenever, it doesn't matter, CGI was still growing. It was not at the level that it is now. So to do these zero gravity shots, you get into a Boeing KC-135 nicknamed the Vomit Comet, and it would fly up into the air, and then it would make this arc, and then it would come back down. And at the top, you would have approximately 25 seconds of zero gravity, or what they call microgravity, and they would shoot in that 25 seconds. Now, with it only being 25 seconds, they had to get multiple shots in a row. So they would do, on a day of shooting for these shots, it would be 40 in the morning. They would break for lunch, and then it would be 40 in the evening. And rumor has it that one of the cameramen could not handle it and actually vomited on Mr. Kevin Bacon.
Yikes.
So, Kyle, do you have an interesting fact about this movie?
I do, but it's kind of an interesting fact about NASA as a whole.
Okay.
So my interesting fact is that the Space Shuttle program, which is now officially over and has been for 10 years, was actually more dangerous fatality-wise than the Saturn V programs. Yeah, the only, and I don't want to say only because everybody who dies like in explorative, whatever. Everybody who dies in an accident is very tragic.
Right.
But 3 people died in the Apollo program, and it was the crew of Apollo 1. There have been 2 different space shuttles that have blown up upon re-entry. Well, okay. One upon re-entry, one upon leaving. The Challenger in 1986 and the Columbia in 2003. Both of them had crews of 7 people.
Wow.
So the space shuttle program was supposed to be the next step forward, and in many ways, technologically, it was. But apparently, it came with a much higher inherent risk because you have 14 fatalities in direct space flight-related things to 3 fatalities in a training exercise. In presumably, other than the short, what would have been a successful spaceflight, which, I mean, like if it had shorted in space, they'd have died too. But,
Right.
And that is compared to only 4 Russian cosmonaut fatalities, even though the general consensus among historians is that the Russian space program was more haphazardly put together and less funded.
Interesting.
So yeah, technology is not always the safety we think it is.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, we finally got this one down, hopefully. And next week, we're moving on to... I don't even know which order we're going to be in, so...
I don't know.
It'll be a surprise.
Oppenheimer's on Peacock now.
Yep, Oppenheimer.
Now we're recording this. Full disclosure, this is the second time we recorded this podcast because the first time we sounded awful, and we don't have a lot of time left, so...
So we're going to head out, and hopefully we can stir the tanks properly without setting off an explosion.
Before we say something else dumb, goodbye. See you next week.
Goodbye.